Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Evaluator training video for the Texas Youth and Government Appeals Court. My name is Brandon Fantine. I'm a former Texas YG competitor and a former Texas YG evaluator, and I'm more than honored to be giving this talk today. Now, before we begin, I would like to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to be here and watch this video. Me and the rest of the YG team really appreciates you putting in the effort to be the best possible evaluator that you can be. And we know that the students are going to appreciate that as well. So first off, let me address, why are we even making this training video? Something that we really haven't done before. Well, in the past, we've had issues with evaluators not using the same metric. And that's not to say they weren't using the 0 to 5 point scale that we'll talk about later, but it means that some evaluators were a little too lenient with giving out their 3s, their 4s, and their 5s, and some evaluators were a little too strict in giving out those higher scores, and it led to a lot of teams having inaccurate ballots. And it's very important that we recalibrate, we set a standard so that everybody's on the same page, because this total score, the score that a team gets that determines their placement, isn't just important in determining who gets first, second, and third, but it's very important to determining where are these students at? What do they need to work on? What are they lacking? What are they excelling in? It's a very important metric that helps our students learn and grow as competitors. So let's just dive right into things and talk about scoring teams. But before we do that, sorry to pull the rug out from under you guys again, what exactly does it mean to even be an evaluator? What even is your role here at the Texas Youth and Government District and State competition? Well, your position goes well beyond assigning teams a certain numerical score to determine their ranking. You're actually here to help the competitors grow and become better. And that's both through by giving them a score and by giving them feedback. And the best way to do this is by being kind, being honest, and giving them notes. It's very, very important that both on the evaluation form and in person that you tell these evaluators as much as you possibly can. And we'll get into more specifics about that later. Now, for those of you who are returning, Texas YG is doing evaluating a little bit differently. We are no longer using a paper form, and instead, we're using an online document. Now, this online form can be accessed from any device that includes a computer, a phone, or a tablet, whatever you have on you. Anything that can really access the internet. And what it is it's basically a one-to-one recreation of the old paper form that we used to use, except in a virtual format. Now, one of the benefits of this, of course, it streamlines the process of tabulating team scores and returning ballots to students, but by converting everything to a virtual format, we're able to codify what exactly a score of 0 means and a score of 5. So when you first open the form during a round, you're going to see on the landing page a summary of what exactly it means to give a student a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5. And of course, 0 being the worst possible score that sort of indicates a student either didn't try at all or didn't show up to the competition, and a 5 being the highest possible score, showing that a student put in a lot of effort and delivered a very high quality performance. Now, this 0 to 5 point scale does change with specific categories, and we'll talk about that shortly, but it is a general sort of idea that you can see on this slide and you'll be able to see on the very first page of the evaluator's form. Now, the second, third, fourth, and fifth pages are all information pages. It's places for you to fill out what is your name, what round is this, what courtroom are you in. For the appellant team, what team are they? What school are they from? Same thing with the appellee, and same thing for the student justice. Now, it's very, very important that you fill these out and you fill it out as accurately as humanly possible. Because if you attribute a score to the wrong team, what we're actually going to end up seeing is incorrect results. And that really detriments us in our main goal here to recalibrate how we're scoring teams and to provide the best possible user experience and the most possible help and feedback to our competitors. Now, after you fill out these pages, we finally begin scoring our competitors. Now, the form is broken down into scoring one attorney at a time. So the first appellant attorney, the second appellant attorney, the first appellee attorney, the second appellee attorney, and then the student justice. Now, the student justice is rated on a different set of qualities, but for the appellant attorneys and the appellee attorneys, all the same questions are asked. So we're going to be discussing those questions and not necessarily the form page by page. So the first question is the knowledge and use of the facts. Now, a score of 0 means that the facts of the case, so the context, what exactly are we talking about here? Why has this issue been presented for the court? That is never mentioned. It's completely either glossed over for a score of 1 or omitted entirely from an argument. Now, of course, since 0 is the worst score, 5 rightfully means that the facts were discussed and they were discussed in great detail. However, with this section, there is a little bit of a caveat. In order to get a score of a 5, instead of a score of a 4, a team must address the bad facts. And what exactly we mean by bad facts are, for the appellant side, facts of the case that hurt their argument, and for the appellee, facts of the case that hurt their own argument. This is sort of a time for teams to inoculate against issues and sort of explain away why something doesn't matter. It's important that this happens in the real appellate court system, and of course we want to reflect that in our own appellate court competition. Now, moving on from knowledge and use of facts, we have knowledge and use of case law. As many of you know, the most important differentiating factor between the appeals court and the judicial court is the use of case law. And now case law is pretty much the sole basis for most appellate court arguments. Now, in our competitions, we want case laws to be used and for it to be used properly. And of course, the latter part of that statement, what exactly does it mean to use a court authority properly, is quite hard to quantify, and that is up to discretion by each individual evaluator. But to give you a sort of baseline of what do you need to be considering, what do you need to be asking, is can you understand why this authority was used? Can you understand why this case was used? Is there a clear purpose for this case, for this authority? And was this authority even helpful to the argument? We don't want students to be using a case just for the sake of using a case. Everything in their argument has to be intentional, or as close to intentional as you possibly can get. Now, both of these past two categories were very much based in the substantive body of a student's argument. But that's only really one half of this competition. The other half is style. We want all arguments to be as effective and persuasive as they possibly can be. We want them to be compelling. We want them to be engaging. And we'll get more into the engaging part later. But an effective argument is something that is convincing and very, very well argued. You want students to get up there and you look at them and they feel like a real attorney, not somebody who is just learning for the first time, for a 5. And of course, that is a very, very high expectation. We're setting the bar high. Some students will achieve it and some won't. The most important thing for you to consider is, was this argument convincing? If I was a layperson, if I wasn't an attorney, and I sat down and I heard this argument for the appellant or I heard this argument for the appellee, would I agree with them? Did they make good points? Did they make points that sway me in one way or the other? Did they use their case law and the facts correctly? Did they deliver their argument in a correct way? Questions like these are what you want to be asking yourself when determining style points, because style, in all honesty, is the most subjective thing there is. And we're trying to be as objective as possible. In a similar vein, from effectiveness and persuasiveness, we have demeanor and presentation. Now, this is very much still in the realm of style. Students should score very highly if they clearly practiced a lot, right? If this argument feels very natural and it feels, honestly, like the other slide said, convincing. And of course, you do want competitors to be professional. You don't want them to be using slang. You don't want to hear them doing anything that is not expected in a normal courtroom. But of course, demeanor and presentation are some things that can be very easily fixed, very easily improved on. So no matter the score that you give competitors for this specific section, we want you to provide them feedback on how to improve. If they gave a convincing performance, an engaging performance, is there anything that can make it better? Or was it perfect? If they performed subpar, how can they improve? What are the things that they can change? And then last but certainly not least for the appellant and the appellee teams is their ability to respond to the questions posed. So the biggest issue in appeals court for a competitor is, how do I respond to a question off the cusp? And then from there, how do I redirect myself back into my argument and continue the points that I were making? In order to get a score of 5, students should answer all questions in full with conviction. So with a lot of confidence, they truly believe what they're saying, and it doesn't interrupt the flow of their argument to be asked a question. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit tricky because we're evaluating response to questions on a lot of different factors. A 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, and a 0 are all sort of different in one way or another. So you get a score of 4. Students did answer all those questions, and they did resume their argument, but they didn't answer those questions confidently. They didn't have that level of, I know what I'm talking about, that is necessary to be a good, successful appellate lawyer. To get a score of a 3, a student, even though they did answer all of their questions, wasn't really able to redirect themselves back into their argument. There was a long stretch of pauses, of stopping and thinking of, how do I go back to this? And then for 2, an argument ended after a question was answered. Something that a lot of coaches and a lot of competitors know is that you never end your argument on a question. And we want to reinforce that. That's something that we very much want to be teaching these students, and we want them to take away remembering that simple fact because it applies to a lot of aspects of life. And then for a score of 1, only a few of the questions were answered. Some questions were explicitly ignored. In a score of 0, no questions were answered at all. They were all ignored. And like I said earlier, answering questions are the hardest part for a competitor. And with all of these things in mind, with all the specifics that I just talked about, you also need to consider, as the evaluator, did this competitor answer the specific question that was posed? A lot of times there's issues where student justice will ask a question. The appellant or appellee attorney won't necessarily answer that question, but will answer something related. And the student justice will just move on because they're also wrapped up in the heat of the argument. They're trying to put on a very good presentation, run a good quality courtroom, and they're not able to catch everything. It's your job to catch what falls through the cracks and to make sure no things go unnoticed, good and bad. Speaking of the student justices are scored using a different set of criterion. They need to be running a high quality and very, very respectful courtroom, fostering a healthy environment and asking some pretty tough questions. We don't want our student justices to be asking softball questions. And what I mean by that is things that can be easily answered. Things such as, when was XYZ case decided? Something that all it requires is a little bit of memorization. Student justices are there to make the competitors think, to make them work, to make them try for the highest scores possible. And if they're not executing that responsibility to the highest standard, they also should not get scored to that highest standard. So the question then remains, what about the verdict? The Chief Justice in any sort of courtroom tends to give a verdict, especially in high school appellate court. It's something that is pretty much par for the course, even if that might not be necessarily how the appeals courts work in real life. If a verdict is given, never, under any circumstance, consider that in your score. When the verdict is being delivered, that's the time for you to fill out your evaluation form. That is not the time for you to change the scores that you're giving competitors based off of who won. And then by extension, a big part about deciding who wins, who loses, is deciding who had the right argument and who had the wrong argument. And as an evaluator, you need to try to remove your biases as much as possible and evaluate competitors solely on their performance and the quality of their argument. Try to be unbiased. Try to stick to that baseline, that consistency that we're trying to implement this year. So after you've finished scoring a competitor, what exactly do you do from there? Well, you give them feedback. Like I mentioned at the very, very beginning of this presentation, giving feedback is a part of your job, and it's very, very important that you do so. It is highly encouraged that you provide as much feedback as you possibly can, both on the evaluation form and in person. And so when you're in person and when you're telling these teams, here's what you can improve on, and here's what you did very well for, use up as much time you have remaining. If the round went long and you don't have a lot, don't give a lot of feedback in person and put most of it in the form. But if you ended the round early, say everything that you want to say in person so students can perform better in their next round and the round after that. Remember, please keep in mind that a lack of preparation and a low score and a lot of things to work on doesn't mean that a competitor didn't care and doesn't have the drive to improve. Be a kind teacher. Give them feedback. Give them things to improve on in a way that doesn't hurt their feelings, that makes them want to improve and want to try harder. Well, thank you all for listening to this roughly 16 to 17-minute presentation. I really do appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email texasyg@austinymca.org. We are so excited to have you guys helping us in both the district and state conference, and we will see you at those events.